It is a Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. On today's show, we are going to talk about the nationally televised schedule for the NHL. We're also going to talk about the Athletics point projection for each individual Florida Panthers skater. And we are going to ask a question. Are we being too harsh about the Panthers offseason? Are we giving them too much praise? Where do our expectations lie? And are they justified for the Panthers? All on this Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, September 9th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're at your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at Monoman12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. And thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Don't forget to also subscribe to Locked On NHL and Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden. We'll be covering all the off-season activities around the National Hockey League. And today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So, Cats fans, we are officially 34 days away from opening night. John Van Beesbrook days away from opening night. And I'm excited. I hope you guys are too. And it's funny how you discussed something earlier in the week. We spoke with the guys from Locked On Senators on Tuesday's show. If you want to go back and listen to it, if you want to queue it up right after this one, or even pause this one and go listen to that one prior to this episode. We discussed really about the nationally televised schedule, that it wasn't out at the time, but based on the structure of the schedule, we could possibly see what kind of games could be aired for the Panthers on the national stage. But just a few days ago, on Wednesday, the nationally televised schedule came out for the entire NHL. And, usually on Wednesdays, most NHL teams are off, and that's when they have the rivalry night, special Wednesday night hockey for, at least when I grew up watching it, it was mostly on NBCSN as the Wednesday night game, while most of the NHL was off that day. So most times Panthers would be off on Wednesdays, but the home opener against the Philadelphia Flyers will be played October 19th on TNT. So the broadcasters aren't announced yet as who will be calling that game, but I'm going to assume it's a pair of Kenny Albert and Eddie Olachuk in that game for TNT. Also, the Panthers have another nationally televised game on TNT on December 21st against the up-and-coming New Jersey Devils. I'm expecting a way better season from the New Jersey Devils, even though goaltending is still a question for them. So 2 Wednesday night hockey games, nationally televised schedule for the Panthers. Then the Panthers have 5 more games on ESPN Plus /Hulu. They're only their second home game of the season to start against the Tampa Bay Lightning. A West Coast game, at San Jose, late Thursday night going into Friday morning, likely going to be a late night Fairbanks Friday on that day. December 28th against Detroit, another Thursday game. The 13th against the Columbus Blue Jackets, and the 30th, December 30th, which is a Friday night going into Saturday, against the Carolina Hurricanes. And these are subject to change throughout the season. So because we saw as many times last season, just 2 or 3 weeks before said game, that they would be shifted from Bally Sports Florida / Bally Sports Sun to ESPN Plus. And really the ESPN Plus / Hulu games really only affect the people who live in the markets of where to go to get these games. For me, who doesn't live in South Florida anymore, the procedure stays the same for me in order to get a game, because any out of market Panther game, I can get the Bally Sports Florida feed from ESPN Plus. The only difference is it's a different broadcast crew doing the game. So nationally televised, once again, really, it's really only down to 2 for the Panthers. But if you want to count ESPN Plus / Hulu, I go knock yourself out. But the Puck Report / and has had a tweet out about the amount of games that the NHL will be broadcasting on all various platforms. I'm going to actually share that with you real quick on a full screen for people on the YouTube. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you'll see everything that I'm seeing right now. So this tweet from Puck Report NHL, 62 games on TNT, 103 games on multiple ESPN networks, 15 on ABC, 36 on ESPN, 1 on ESPN2, 78 on ESPN Plus, 53 on Hulu. But then let's look at the team breakdowns. And this is kind of the impression that I'm getting based on this graph, this chart, alone, is that the NHL is doing a mix of stars, marketing stars, versus teams that have resumes, teams that have been there for a long time, teams who have won in their past, even if they're not an original 6 team. And for example, Anaheim, nobody's expecting Anaheim to be a playoff team, maybe a bubble playoff team. But what do they have? A marketable star in Trevor Zegras. Mason McTavish had an incredible World Junior Championship for Team Canada. That's going to result in more nationally televised games for the Anaheim Ducks. Boston Bruins, a team that has been around for a long time, an original 16, 14, despite missing Brad Marchand and Charlie McAvoy. Buffalo Sabres, not an original 6 team, but a team who the market for hockey is crazy over there in Buffalo. So a good hockey market over there in Buffalo. So you market places like that. Carolina, that has been a team that has been on the doorstep to possibly making the Stanley Cup final. And, they've been knocking at the door for years. So they are justified. Colorado just recently won a cup. So that's justified. Chicago I have mixed feelings about it. Chicago has 14. It's obvious that they're tanking this year. They have no intention of trying to win. But of course, the brand sells itself. And that's what's going to cause the Chicago Blackhawks to have more nationally televised games. And if you're talking better team and what's more watchable, of course, the Panthers should have more nationally televised games than the Chicago Blackhawks. The Panthers have 7, the Blackhawks have 14. But with the product on the ice and everything that has gone on with the Chicago Blackhawks off the ice, I don't know if it's a good idea to put this many games on the national stage. But hey, the NHL wants to make their money, and they want to please the fan bases of Chicago and people who happen to be fans outside the region of Chicago, because they travel well wherever they go. So that's a little bit of mixed feelings there. Dallas, great goalie, and Jay Gottinger left a great lasting impression last season. Jason Robertson is another one in the mix. Detroit, young, promising players. Moritz Seider, Lucas Raymond, their captain Dylan Larkin, even though he's up for a contract. Edmonton, that's justified. Minnesota, justified. Kirill the Thrill. We want to see more Kirill the Thrill. Penguins with Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin. Philadelphia is weird. Of course, I think they want to put more of John Tortorella in people's faces, and it's going to be an interesting year in Philly. That is the team that they could either be middle of the pack or get number one overall. They're not a playoff team. Of course, New York Rangers have been in the Eastern Conference Final just recently, and they have probably one of the best goaltenders in the world right now. St. Louis, they recently won a cup, so that can be a little bit of justified. Seattle 10, that could be a little bit justified, them being a new franchise and having two promising players in Shane Wright and Matty Beniers. Tampa Bay just recently won a cup. Toronto, they're like the Yankees of the NHL. Of course, they're always going to get their games no matter how bad they are. I mean, maybe Toronto's more of like the Dallas Cowboys. They haven't won anything. Also, Queen Elizabeth was in power the last time the Toronto Maple Leafs won a Stanley Cup. So that's how long Queen Elizabeth II has been in power. Rest in peace, Queen Elizabeth. Vegas, that one I don't understand, especially with their two goaltenders, Laurent Brossoit and Robin Lehner being out. That one I don't get. Washington, I understand. But the Vegas, Chicago, I don't understand. St. Louis, I don't really understand that much. Those are the three that is really iffy. San Jose, obviously tanking as well. They have more nationally televised games than the Panthers, and a lot of their players from their Stanley Cup run a few years ago have been making their way out of the franchise, and they're in clear rebuild mode for the San Jose Sharks. So 7 nationally televised games for the Panthers for now. Depending on how well they do, we're going to get some more. I mean, listen, they weren't on the national stage really at all in the season. And then as they were winning more games, we saw a TNT game. We saw an ESPN Sunday game against Detroit last season. Let's not forget that. So, and the NHL is going to a mix of players who are marketable and teams who have a history. So I'm glad that I get to see Trevor Zegras more. People want to see Trevor Zegras. People want to see Lucas Raymond. People want to see Moritz Seider. But I want to see the Tkachuk brothers face off against each other on the national stage. What about that? Ottawa only has one nationally televised game here in the U.S. But what about a Tkachuk versus Tkachuk? Come on, man. Come on, NHL. Let's get that one on the national stage for people to watch. Of course, people outside of the region can watch on ESPN Plus if they have a subscription, but people who don't, we need to get those games into their televisions. That's for sure. In segment number 2, we are going to go over point projections for the Florida Panthers due to Dom Luszczyszyn's model from The Athletic. We are going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about BetOnline. And BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week games. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use a mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Segment number 2 here on this Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And we have some point projections out for every team in the National Hockey League from Dom Luszczyszyn of The Athletic. And this one I don't really understand. And I'm scrambling right now in order to get the screen share up. But I'm going to start reading them. I'm going to start reading them to you guys while I am gathering the screen share for this. But right now it has a breakdown. Got it right here. This was thank you to David Rodriguez at David954FLA and host of the FLA Cats Hockey Podcast, shared a point projection list for the Panthers. And hold on, let me zoom out real quick. And the following has Barkov with 37 goals, 53 assists, 90 points in 78 games. Doesn't make sense to me because he had 88 points in 67 games. Like just about the same in less games. And Alexander Barkov is it just is right in his prime, right there. Matthew Tkachuk, 86 points in 82 games when he had 104 in 82. And maybe those numbers are inflated because, I don't know, playing with Johnny Gaudreau and Elias Lindholm. And if I'm Paul Maurice, I would put him on that second line first to start off the season with Sam Bennett and maybe a Colin White in the mix on that line. But I don't see that much of a almost 18 points less than last season when this guy's just beginning his prime. That one I don't quite understand. Sam Reinhardt, 33 goals and 40 assists in 73 games when he had 82 points in 78. He has Dom Luszczyszyn has Rhino at 13 power play goals, just like he did last season. So that's not going to go away for Sam Reinhardt. At least the projections say that it's not going to. Aaron Ekblad. This one I don't understand at all because last season, even before his injury, Ekblad was averaging about a point per game. This model shows that he'll be about 17 points off of being a point per game, while Aaron Ekblad at the 61 game mark was just 4 points off being a point per game. So is Aaron Ekblad going to slow down that much? That's a question. That remains to be seen. We have to, of course, allow the games to be played in order to really see if that manifests or not. Anton Lindell, 23 goals, 33 assists in 56 points in 75 games played projection wise. Of course, 44 points in 65. This is a little bit of a leap for Anton Lindell. Could have been a 20-goal score in his first season, of course. If it weren't for injury, would have been in a conversation for the Calder. But even if Anton Lindell doesn't necessarily get to 30 goals, even gets to 25, that's a step in the right direction for Anton Lindell. And of course, he's going to be playing big penalty kill minutes as well, along with Alexander Barkov. But who knows how Paul Maurice is going to shape that up. Carter Hagee, 25 goals and 28 assists, 53 points in 77 games played projection, while he had 24 goals and 31 assists in 55 points in 78 last season. Listen, Carter Hagee left a great lasting impression last year in the postseason, and in the beginning of this new contract, this was one of the diamonds in the rough that Bill Zito found. And if he's going to play with Alexander Barkov on that same line, then I assume it's going to be around the same production. So that one could be correct. Who knows? Again, we got to let the games play. Sam Bennett, 23 goals and 24 assists, 47 points in 76 games played. This has Sam Bennett's production being down from the season before. And who knows? We don't know if Anton Lindell is going to eventually become the 2C this year. It could. I'm hoping. The hope is for it to be as soon as next year, while Anton Lindell learns a little bit at the beginning. And hey, if Anton Lindell takes a little bit of a leap in the beginning and ends up being the 2C this year, hey, even better. That's what we've been talking about even before Anton Lindell even signed his ELC. Anthony Duclair, 17 goals, 18 assists, 35 points in 53 games played this upcoming season. That's the point projection. While he had 31 goals, 27 assists in 74 games. 53 games played this season is a little bold. I'm going to say somewhere around 40 that he's going to play. This one is probably the hardest one to judge based on we don't know how explosive he's going to be when he comes back, because listen, when it comes to Achilles, that first step is all very important, and the mental side of it as well, in how aggressive you're going to skate once you tear an Achilles or tear a ligament in your knee. That's going to be the hardest part of it all for anyone. So 53 games played for Anthony Duclair is very generous. I think he's going to be somewhere, maybe around like 40 to 45. So, and if you get 12, 15 goals out of Duclair once he comes back, I think that's a victory for the Panthers. So Dom Luszczyszyn could be right on the point production for Anthony Duclair, but just might be slightly off on games played coming up for Duke. The one I disagree with probably the most is Gus Forsling. And I'm very high on Gus Forsling. If you've been listening to the show, really ever since the trade, when they traded Mackenzie Weegar to Calgary, Gus Forsling has been the guy I've been talking about really the most and really praising the most for the Panthers. Dom Luszczyszyn has him at 9 goals and 23 assists, 32 points in 77 games, while Forsling had 10 goals and 27 assists, 37 points in 71 games. And this one I agree with most. Why? It's obvious because of the additional role that Gustav Forsling is going to be playing this season for the Panthers. Going to be playing some top pair minutes with Aaron Ekblad, which means his production is going to go up. So that's why when we talk about with Locked On Senators, who's going to bring the biggest fantasy jump this season, fantasy and reality, I'm going to say Gus Forsling is the most obvious answer. That is the safest bet. Anton Lindell is second in line as a bet to increase their production. But I think that Gus Forsling, it's a safe bet that he is going to take Panthers. And I don't know where Dom will find Gus Forsling as far as like where he plays. I don't know how much he watches the Panthers, but if you know that you're going to be on the top pair along with Aaron Ekblad, then why is the point projection that low for Gus Forsling? And I'm going to do one more before we transition to the third and final segment. And this one, I believe, probably makes the most sense, really, of this one. Age is a big factor in it. Patrick Hornquist, 13 goals and 17 assists, 30 points, in 75 games played, while he had 11 goals, 17 assists, and 28 points in 65 games. Of course, he's going to be part of power play too, more than likely, and in clutch situations, late game situations, probably in desperate times, we could see Paul Maurice put Patrick Hornquist out there and play bigger minutes. Of course, trusting a veteran presence on this Panthers roster more than likely. But don't be surprised if the production of Patrick Hornquist is down based on age and based on based on the fact that Patrick Hornquist might be a little slower in this part of his career. But yeah, here's the point projections for everyone else. If you want to kind of look at it for yourself, these are the rest of the list is like the bottom pairing defensemen and a lot of the role players who are going to be part of this team. The bottom 6 lines as well. Those are a little bit, but I wanted to go over like the top 10 point projection for the Panthers of where I think whether I agree or disagree with Dom Luszczyszyn's model here, based on where he sees the Florida Panthers. So in segment number 3, we've been talking all offseason based on where we believe this Florida Panthers team is going to be this season. And ask ourselves, is it a little too harsh? Is it just right? Or are we giving too much praise to Bill Zito and what he's done this offseason? And there are no wrong answers here, but we're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
For Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast on this Friday, September 9th edition of the show. And I wanted to tease you guys at the end of segment number 2 and just ask ourselves and discuss really. And really ask yourselves this tonight. And ask yourselves is if everybody around the Florida the national landscape, are we all too harsh on the Panthers? Are we giving them too much praise based on their future? Or is it just right for this Panthers team on where they are and how honest are we with them? And of course, games got to be played. And we are going to see in just a few weeks how it's going to turn out. And this is the tough part about the offseason, of course, talk about this team, because we're trying to envision. And we literally immediately, once free agency hit and seen the lack of moves, even before the trade, we said that the Panthers were taking a step back. Of course, the salary cap is where it is with the buyout of Keith Yandel and Scott Darling. And of course, there was the trade, big trade. Of course, Panthers get better in the long term versus a 1 to 2 year window. And if everything flops with this Panthers team and Huberdeau still signed long term, you have that opportunity to trap yourselves long term if this flops. If it flopped, because it of course, Huberdeau and Weegar aren't here anymore. And of course, the questions about the defense. But the expectations for the Panthers is around round 1, round 2. If they make it, awesome. But a lot of betting websites, a lot of them have the Panthers getting to the Stanley Cup final, some of them making it to the Eastern Conference final as well. And that's awesome. But what has made these last 2 seasons, about to be 3, enjoyable for me personally as the host of this show was the fact that the expectation for the Panthers has been so low. And let's go year by year these last 3 years. Expectation in the 2021 season when they're all in pods. I was thinking about a 4th or 5th place bubble team going into the end of the season in a 56 game season. What happened? They finished 2nd. Just last season, a 2nd place finish behind the Tampa Bay Lightning is what I predicted. What happened? Not only do they win the division, but they win the President's Trophy. This year, let's before I get to this year, actually, Panthers have exceeded expectations both those times. That has made the season more enjoyable for me. So, how do we make this season more enjoyable for all of us? Is to have our expectations not high. And, on paper is what it is. We know where the Panthers stand on paper. But of course, if you interview every single Florida Panthers player, they're going to have all the confidence in the world that they could even go out and win it all. Of course, if I'm a player in that locker room, I'm thinking the same thing, whether it's a team coming right off the President's Trophy in the Florida Panthers, or I'm a team that's near the bottom of the bottom on paper. You're always going to believe that you're going to win. And the best part about this Florida Panthers team going to this season is that they have a taste of winning now, a little bit. So the expectation for the Panthers at most would be a second round finish for the Panthers. But would you, the Florida Panther fan, be surprised at all if they make it to the Stanley Cup final? I wouldn't. Because you have foundational pieces there. Yeah, Huberdeau's gone. Yeah, Uyghur's gone. Barkov and Ekblad are still there. Bobrovsky's still there, even though we don't know how he's going to look going into this season, because you just can't predict how a goalie is going to look from year in and year out. But if he looks anything like he did last season, this team is going to be in a good position. But it comes down to expectations in order to really have fun this season. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys with today. Because now we have to start getting into that mindset of the season. It's basically here. A week from today is going to be the prospect tournament in Raleigh, North Carolina, where the Florida Panthers prospects will be taking on Carolina's, Nashville's, and Tampa Bay's prospects over there in Raleigh. Last year it was held in Wesley Chapel. This year is held in Raleigh. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be, we know that this is still a team that on paper should make the postseason. But then once the games start, it's anybody's chance for the cup. No matter what betting odds say. And whatever is on paper, because we've seen eighth seeds make it all the way to the Stanley Cup final. We saw a Tampa Bay team that won the President's Trophy take a step back on paper and then go out there and win it all. Why can't that be the Panthers? So, if those happen, if they even make it to the Stanley Cup final or even make it to the Eastern Conference final, we are as excited as can be. But what are your expectations? Ask yourselves that. You can actually, if you guys want, you could tweet it at me at Monoman12 or at @LO_FLA Panthers. What are your specific expectations? Mine are, once again, second round, back to it. But wouldn't be surprised if they get any further. And anything past that, for me, is an emotional bonus. And once again, that's what I'm going to leave you here with today. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. This was a fun episode for you guys going over the nationally televised schedule. Don't freak out just yet, guys. If the Panthers do well, there's going to be more of these. And hopefully none of these ESPN Plus / Hulu ones, actual ESPN and TNT ones. So the product on the ice is going to speak for itself for the Panthers. And also the point projections, they're going to speak for themselves as well once the Panthers do hit the ice. And it's time to get emotionally ready. So Can't wait, Panther fans. Next week, we are going to have hopefully another preseason divisional crossover, either Monday or Tuesday. Don't know just yet. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to that so you'll know when the crossovers will be available to you on video or podcast. So in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast so you'll be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steele Roden. We'll be covering all the offseason activities around the National Hockey League. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for your second listen of the day, make sure you listen to today's episode of Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. Sorry, Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.